Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Folks, this one's for the boys. Well, I mean bulls. We are going to hear from Jennifer Koziol today about all things bull fertility. She shares information about what causes subfertility and infertility, as well as tips for developing bulls and how to manage the hierarchy of bulls once you introduce new ones to your herd. Remember, if you are looking for a speaker who can relate to ranchers, engage with the crowd, and add value to your event, I am booking engagements for 2025 and would love to be a part of the great experience that you are putting on. So, you can connect with me on my website for more info. But with that, let's hear from Jennifer. Westway, we believe liquid feed has stood the test of time as a proven, effective, and efficient tool for delivering essential nutrients to livestock. Our molasses-based liquid feed provides essential protein, energy, and nutrients to keep your cattle healthy and productive. Liquid feed offers consistent, cost-effective nutrition, helping producers manage intake, control cost, and maximize feed resources. Learn more about why Westway is the best way to raise beef at www.westwayfeed.com or call 800-800-7517. And that information is also in the show notes. All right, Jennifer, well, thank you for joining me for a conversation today. Previously, I've had you do kind of a live podcast interview with my Rancher Mind group that was just exclusive to them, but that was a few years ago, and I'm excited to bring you back on the show to talk about bulls today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be back, and I always love talking about bulls, so super fun to talk about today.
So, the hard-hitter question that all my guests get to answer right off the bat is, why do you believe or bet on the beef industry each day?
Yeah, so I heard a pretty cool quote once from Dr. Sarah Place, and she talks about that the beef industry uses a technology that produces high quality protein from a solar powered energy source that is human and edible and creates something that's sustainable for the world. And so I think that's a pretty cool when we think and break it down about all the areas that the beef cattle industry impacts. It's a pretty cool way to think about it, and that's why I bet on beef.
Absolutely. And tell us a little more about why you are passionate about bulls.
Yeah, so I grew up in the cattle industry, grew up on a cow-calf operation, went to veterinary school, and then I went on to do a residency in reproduction and really immersed myself into the world of bulls and taking a more in-depth look at fertility. And fertility is one of those things so impactful for the cow-calf producer, and really thinking about the reasons why that we have subfertility and infertility. I really kind of found my way into the world of looking at bulls. And then breeding soundness exams really became a passion of mine, knowing and understanding how impactful they are, not only for the cattle producer, but the impact a veterinarian can have on an operation through that procedure. And so it's really kind of my passion project. I really love it. And I really think it's one of those areas that the bull is one of the most impactful pieces of any successful cow-calf herd. And how can we be successful together?
Absolutely. As someone who grew up raising bulls, also very passionate about how they can impact the cow herd and a lot of different cow herds.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, with your experience and career, what would you say is one of your biggest pet peeves when it comes to bull management, or maybe mismanagement is the better term?
So I don't really have any pet peeves, but something that I'm really passionate about talking about is the value of a complete breeding soundness exam. So when I talk about complete breeding soundness exam, your veterinarian should be doing a physical exam, measuring scrotal circumference, looking at motility, and looking at sperm morphology at a high level. And so really taking that whole look at that bull before they say he's a good breeder or he's a bad breeder. And the other thing I'm really passionate passionate about people knowing is that a breeding soundness exam is not good for life. And so when we think about what a breeding soundness exam tells us, it tells us what's happened in the last 60 days in that bull's life and what his fertility status is on that day. Certainly, things can change very rapidly. And because things can change very rapidly, we need to have these bulls tested before every breeding season. A lot of our seed stock producers sell bulls with a breeding soundness exam behind them, but we need to test those bulls again before we turn them out in cows, and we need to test them in subsequent seasons. We let a lot of bulls remain in our herd that are subfertile. They're not doing the job for us, and they're costing us dollars. And those dollars, I think, are a lot harder hitting in this day and age than they have been in the last decade. And so really taking that into mind, I think that's really probably not my two pet peeves, but probably the soapboxes, if you will, that I'll stand on the most.
So you've used the words subfertile and infertile a couple times. Can you describe what each bull would be? Because they're different.
Yeah, absolutely. So a subfertile bull is going to have some normal sperm cells. And so really, if you get down to a breeding soundness exam, I'm worried about the bull and his physical capacity, right? Can he see the females? Can he walk to the females? Is his feet and leg structure such that he doesn't have pain in his hocks and he can mount females? So I really think about that. But really where I see, and if we dive into the evidence-based research, we know that most bulls fail a BSE based on their sperm and how they're shaped and what that looks like and the defects that we can see. So a subfertile bull he's going to have some percentage of normal cells, but it's going to be below our passing percentage. So 70% normal cells, morphologically, what we determine morphologically normal. So they're the correct shape. They don't have any defects that would inhibit embryo development or actually the sperm getting to the oocyte to connect with it. So he's below the 70%, but he does have some. So like a subfertile bull in my book would be a bull that is producing 50% normal cells, way below the standard, but does have some. So, blind squirrel finds an acorn every once in a while. Subfertile bull is going to get some females pregnant. He's just not going to get his complement of females bred in as timely as manner as a fertile bull. An infertile bull is going to be almost exclusively abnormal cells. So these bulls, or a bull that can extend the penis or something of that nature. So he's going to not be able to make intromission, or he's not going to be able to, even if he has a sperm cells that can make it to the oocyte, they're not going to be able to create an embryo that's going to turn into a calf for us. So when we talk about subfertile and infertile, those are kind of our two categories. We talk about that there's lots of subfertile bulls in the world. There's far less totally infertile bulls. So lots of subfertile bulls, and that's really what we're looking at and looking out for with our breeding soundness exams.
Absolutely. And like you said, very important to have those before every breeding season. What are some causes or factors that can lead to some of those subfertile bulls?
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll kind of talk a lot about, as I mentioned before, sperm morphology is the most common reason that a bull will fail a breeding soundness exam. So we'll talk about reasons that the bull has abnormal sperm morphology. And so we can kind of break those down into three factors. We can have abnormal thermoregulation. So the bull's testicle likes to be 3 to 5 degrees Celsius lower than body temperature. So that needs a cooled environment for proper sperm production. The other thing is that we can talk about stress. And stress comes in many different factors, but we can think about stress just like us. When we're stressed out, cortisol rises, but cortisol is an inhibitor of testosterone. So when we have high cortisol levels, testosterone is going to decrease, which means that our testicles are not going to function in appropriate manner. We can kind of liken the testicles of the bull to factories, and when we have that low testosterone, our factories are not going to put out the quality of material that they would when they're in a happy environment, when they're cool, but testosterone is at the appropriate levels and all of our cells are functioning like they should. So stress can look like hierarchy stress, like you got a young bull getting the crap beat out of him by an older bull. That's one stress. Nutritional stress, going through a blizzard, he's going to be nutritionally stressed and he's going to be environmentally stressed. So he's not only colder than he would like to be, but he's also may have a decrease in nutrition if we're in the heart of that blizzard. The other kind of flip side of that is prolonged heat stress can be one as well. So stress can kind of come in lots of different flavors.
So is that stress going to impact the fertility of the bull right away, or is it going to be 60 days later once that new sperm is mature?
Yeah, that's a great question. So following a impact to sperm production, so bull gets a foot injury and he becomes lame. So he's stressed because it's painful. So following that foot injury, we will start seeing defects as soon as 7 days after that incident occurs. So let's say he cuts his foot, he's super painful, he's very lame. We're going to start seeing changes to his semen production 7 days after that. So if I were to look underneath the microscope, I would start seeing defects. And we'll really watch that impact. If it's singular impact and we get that cut started healing up and he's starting to become less lame, he will have the most defects 21 days after. And then hopefully if he's returning to normal, we've removed the lameness, the cut's healing as he should, he's getting better, we're going to see a gradual increase in the percentage of normal cells that we see. And so it can happen much quicker than people think, and it's much more prolonged than people think. It can take a bull 4 to 6 weeks to come back after an incident. And so really realizing that the worst part's going to happen at 3 weeks after a singular incident, but that bull may be another 2 to 3 weeks before he returns to normal function after something of that nature.
Does tax season make you want to bang your head against the wall? Is billing a bad word in your household? Does meeting with your ag lender make your blood pressure rise? Stress a little less with cattle management software, Performance Beef. It tracks important feed, financial, and health data all in one system. The results? You can pull inventories, detailed financials, and invoices in minutes. Get ahead for next year's tax season. Visit performancelivestockanalytics.com to learn more.
Thank you for explaining that and those specific instances, but what about the genetic component to fertility?
Yeah, absolutely. A genetic component to fertility is something super interesting as we're constantly learning more about the impacts of genetics. Certainly, we can see genetic factors with the percentage of sperm defects. So there are some sperm defects that we see that have a genetic capacity to that. And so we can see that, which is, they have a high propensity to make that certain sperm defect, which is not good. And then we have all the other factors that go into fertility, just the inherent, all the markers that can go into that. And so bull can be set up better for fertility or not. And sometimes we're only now starting to realize what some of those genetic markers are. And then we play in the fact of epigenetics, right? So how the environment affects how those genes are turned off or turned on. What happened to his dam, how that affects the epigenetics of that individual. And so it becomes very convoluted very quickly, but I think that's one of the emerging areas in looking at bull fertility, is looking at those individual genetic patterns and how environment affects those and what we can learn and what we can understand about that. But certainly there is a genetic component to it.
Is there anything else related to kind of this causes of subfertility or infertility that you want to talk about before we switch over into maybe some different topics about bulls?
Yeah, I think we've hit kind of the big ones. Certainly, talking about thermoregulation, we can talk a little bit about that. Thermoregulation certainly is something that we need to think about in our young bulls that are going through bull tests and things like that. Often those bulls have really high body condition scores, and we know when those bulls have increased body condition scores that they start laying down fat in the neck of the scrotum, which is not, if we think about how much cooler the testicles need to be below body temperature, that fat sits there and acts as an insulator. And so certainly thinking about that and being mindful of the body condition scores of our bulls and really trying to weigh out, that's one of the things I think is always something that's a really give and take. We're really thinking about residual feed intakes and things like that of the bull as we really start to think about the efficiency of the calves that he's going to put on the ground, but also realizing that there's some give and take with the fertility of that animal. So really thinking about that and how we kind of find the middle between our two goals is really important to think about.
So that really segues nice into what I wanted to talk about as far as developing bulls. Is there anything else that you think producers who are developing bulls really need to be cognizant of to just optimize that fertility of that bull and set the animal up for success?
Yeah, so there's really some great opportunities within a bull's life to really set him up for success. We know that what happens nutritionally and developmentally to bulls in those first 6 months of life really impact him for the rest of his life as a bull. So if we think about within the testicle, we have different types of cells that support our sperm production. And a lot of those cell populations are developed before that bull is 6 months of age. And so really making sure that bull has high quality nutrition. If we're ever going to think about creep feeding bulls, that's the time to do it and really maximize his nutritional development. So that's a really big opportunity in that bull, and it's not something that we can compensate for later. So it is kind of something to think about as a breeder and developer of bulls, is how are we going to treat the dams of those bulls nutritionally, and how are we going to treat those young bulls, because we can't compensate for it later. Some really nice work has shown that the nutritional impacts in those first 6 months, if they're below average, we can't overcome that later in his life. And then really once we've weaned him and we've put him in a bull development program, and I think there's some really key factors. Developing those bulls at a moderate rate of gain is something that I think is really beneficial for those bulls going forth, and really making sure that those bulls, if we can, put them in an environment where they have to travel to keep those feet in really good condition, keep him using his legs. Young bulls are like our star quarterbacks, right? And so I think we need to think about not only their nutrition during that time, but also thinking about their physical status. And so we're going to ask these young bulls, often been sitting in pens, having all you can eat buffet, and then we're going to send them through the cell, and then they're going to be asked to go work. And that's really hard, right? Like, that's asking our star quarterback to go from sitting on the bench to go through 2-a-days really fast. And so thinking about how we can manage those bulls during not only their development period, but also as they transition into being part of an operation and really having to work for a living. So keeping them on the moderate gain until the time of sale, and then once they're post-sale, they go to their new owners, helping those bulls transition from having that all-you-can-eat buffet to getting to a point where they're ready to go work. Because we often see these bulls come out of sale and they just melt, right? Like, they lose a lot of body condition score, they're fighting for hierarchy status with the herd, and how can we help manage those young bulls that are coming into our herds?
Do you want to talk about that hierarchy status a little more and helping those young bulls out in those situations if they're going to be in, breeding groups where there's multiple sires and whatnot? Because some bulls are just worse fighters than others, and it's always, anytime you move bulls or pull one out and put them back, they're always going to fight a little bit.
Yeah, so kind of we can talk about using multi-sire bulls. If we're using multi-sire pastures, I think the school of thought a lot is that we want to put our younger bulls with older bulls so that they can often learn how to interact in a herd. And that can often have some problems because our older bulls are certainly going to be higher in this social hierarchy, and they're often going to keep those young bulls from breeding, which is probably not what we want as producers. Our younger bulls probably are likely to have those superior genetics that we're really hoping to implement. So what we can do is really thinking about using our young bulls either in smaller groups of single sire pastures where we can, one, know that he is breeding and doing his job, because I think that is always a fear, is he going to do his job? And certainly putting them with a smaller group of females where we can watch them is one way. The other way, which is you have to have a high level of risk tolerance for this, is putting a group of young bulls together. And so trying to keep bulls grouped by age really helps with that social hierarchy. So keeping our really young yearling bulls together versus our 2-year-olds versus our 3-year-olds, et cetera, and our more mature bulls, and really trying to keep those social hierarchies together. When we think about kind of multi-sire pastures, and when we really think about rules of thumb for how many cows a bull should breed, a bull that's less than 3 years of age should probably only have a cow for every month of age that he is. So when we buy these 12-month-old bulls, we probably really need to only give him, if we're turning out when he's 15 months old, we only need to give him 15 cows for the breeding season. So pretty small numbers. And so you can kind of pick and choose how you want your operation to look and what value you want to get out of those young bulls. But when we think about kind of hierarchy systems, certainly age has a big role in that, and really thinking about how those bulls higher up in the social hierarchy are going to impact the breeding ability of those young bulls, because we've all seen those older bulls spend a lot of time running off those young ones and not letting them breed. So thinking about how we can integrate those, is there a way that we can put our younger bulls together or in single sire pastures until they really get going? Once they've been through one breeding season, we compare them with others. They should know what they're doing. And kind of on that same line, I'm a big proponent of parentage verification. I think that's one thing that we don't test in a routine breeding soundness exam is libido. And so doing parentage verification to see how many cows, how many offspring we really did get out of those bulls in a given season, and we know who's out there doing majority of the breeding, and do we have some bulls that just aren't getting any calves on the ground, because those bulls are costing us money. They're really they're a freeloader, right? And they're not really adding to our bottom line, but we're certainly putting resources into them. And how can we use that information to change how we're managing that cow herd?
You brought up using, when they're younger, maybe one bull with a small group of cows to make it a single sire breeding group. And there's risk with that too. So when you say a small group of cows, are you talking about that 12 to 15 if it's a yearling, maybe a few more if it's 18 months to 2 years? I mean, what exactly do you mean when you say smaller group of cows with that?
So in our young bulls, we're going to, if they're less than 3 years, we should only expect them in a 60-day breeding season. We could go 63 if you want 3 full cycles. So if we think about a 63-day breeding cycle, we only want to give that 15-month-old bull 15 cows. Certainly there's some risks in that if he's not getting cows settled, and we can think about reducing the stress on that bull by putting a cleanup bull in after that. So maybe that young bull has those 15 cows for 40 days, and then we put a cleanup bull behind him. So those are some ways that we can think about reducing the stress on single sire pastures. And it's a lot about how is best to manage. There's not 2 operations that are the same, but just thinking about different ways that we can manage those young bulls to get the full impact out of what we paid for them. Bulls are certainly not cheap, and they're a large investment for our operations. So, how can we maximize what he's adding to our bottom line?
Do you have big ambitions for your operation, but feel like you get so caught up in the day-to-day fires that you are just spinning in circles? You aren't alone. I've been in your shoes and know just how frustrating it can be. That's why I created Move the Ranch Forward. It's a guide for ranchers. This guide is a PDF that contains the exact process my husband and I use to stay focused on our goals throughout the year, even when life throws us curveballs. You can access Move the Ranch Forward today at casualcattleconversations.com. So, what should producers really be looking for when they're buying bulls on the fertility front? Is it just that BSE and then that scrotal circumference, or are there more things you're encouraging?
When producers are looking at buying bulls, we certainly want to look at all aspects of that bull. What does that bull look like phenotypically? What does his feet look like? Is his feet in good condition? Is he going to be able to go out and walk those pastures? And we're not going to have to worry about getting, that he's starting to have a long toe or toes that are starting to curl up, that he has a chance of becoming lame. So one, looking at feet. Two, looking at structure of back legs. See a lot of bulls that are straight through their hock and pastern. Those bulls are going to eventually become lame on you, can have stifle injuries, etc. So looking at the bulls phenotypically, and then really starting to hone in. What is his scrotal circumference? Does he match what you want for your cow herd, frame size wise, body score wise? And then we get to the genetics, and it's really like picking bulls are whole packages, right? We're going to study our catalog and we're going to pick out our bulls that are going to improve our genetics the way we want. We're going to go out and look at him and make sure he has all the parts, making from the ground up, making sure that he has all of our parts, that he can get out and he can move, and he really moves like we want our bulls to move. And then depending on the breed, there are some longevity and fertility factors that we can look at, and those are really breed specific, and we can take those into consideration as well. And then looking at his breeding soundness exam, what is he producing today? And so I always so that's the first part of buying bulls. And then if we're buying bulls, let's just say we're buying bulls, most of us buy bulls in February. It's when most of our sales are. February start at 1st of March. I mean, if we're not breeding until May, let's get that bull home. He's going to have 6 to 8 weeks. We're going to put him in quarantine for biosecurity for our herds. We're going to let him get into breeding shape. We're going to slowly start decreasing his carb intake. He's going to start getting into what I call their working pants and ready to go to work for us. And we're going to, just like we do all of our mature bulls, we're going to go through and we're going to retest him, and we're going to make sure that he's good and he's ready to work. Some bulls can become extremely stressed in that time period between sale and when they're ready to go to go out to pasture. And so we can see this. A lot of them are travel a long way. They get into a different environment, a different feed source, things like that. Lots of reasons for a bull to become stressed, and not every bull handles stress in the same manner. If we have a pen of bulls and they were all treated the same and we had the same stressor on all of them, not all of them are going to be impacted equally by that. And we don't understand the reason for that when we look at a pen of bulls, but making sure that he's, regardless of whether was stressed out or not stressed out, making sure that he's ready and good to go. Those are the big things that I tell producers, is that really make sure you look at not only the catalog, but look at that bull in the pen, and then really taking care of him when you get home and rechecking him. Usually there's a time lag between when we buy him and when we put him out, and we want to make sure that he's still ready to go when we turn him out.
All right. Well, I feel like this has just been a lot of great and practical information in less than 30 minutes, and I really appreciate that. Do you have any final thoughts that you want to share?
I think one thing that is really important for me to share is the collaboration between veterinarians and producers. I think it's important for veterinarians to think about themselves as equal opportunity evaluators, that we are there. Our job is to make sure that that cattle producer is going as best as we can with the predictors that we have, that cattle producer is going to have a calf crop. And I think that's our job as veterinarians, is to do that. And then thinking from the producer side, realizing that a bull fails himself and not the veterinarian fails the bull. If a veterinarian's doing their job, they're advocating for the good of the cow-calf producer, and that we're really trying to look out for their best interest. I think sometimes tensions can get high when we go through a set of bulls and find some ones that are not going to cut the mustard, and those are really hard. The veterinarian is equally not as happy as the producer is, but they're all looking out for the same goal, which is the sustainability and longevity of that individual and their operation. And so I think realizing that we are all fighting for the same goal and that we're all on the same team.
Well, I really appreciate that response, and it's very true, because I know last year before breeding season we went for our annual BSEs, and we had one that failed, and it sucked, but we saved a lot of money because we got more cows bred by being able to find a replacement. And so just very important to keep that fertility in mind.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. Well, do you mind if you share your email or contact info if people want to reach out to you?
Yeah, no, please share. Always happy to talk about bulls. So happy to answer questions, happy to talk about bulls. So we can definitely share my contact. My email's jkoziol, Koziol, @ttu.edu. I'm not always one-day responses, but I am fairly good about checking my email and getting back on a fairly quick basis. So always happy to talk about bulls and discuss anything. So always good to chat.
All right. Well, Jennifer, thank you again for being on the show in a different way this time and sharing all of your knowledge and experience with the ranchers out there. Folks, we will include that information down in the show notes, along with any other resources that were mentioned in today's episode. Remember, if you haven't already, to go get those bulls tested, and happy ranching, folks.